Christine Lagarde, France's finance minister, spoke about regulation ahead of this G20 summit and said they'd like to enlarge the scope of regulation. That is something that some like to hear and something that others don't like to hear. So what are you expecting on the regulation front? A merging of ideas? Are we going to see any real action here? We have Dodd-Frank here in the U.S., we have Basel III, but we don't really have a cohesive agreement to move forward.
Well, Basel III there has been agreement on bank capital standards,
right,
but there are areas in which we need to make more progress. One is on greater coherence and effectiveness of supervision, not just regulation. Secondly, we need to find what we call resolution mechanisms, what to do about those banks and institutions that are too big to fail. They're not just banks. And we need to make sure there's better assessment of the situation of each country's financial system. All of those are in train in this year, but they're not going to all get settled this year. These are very difficult questions. The G20 needs to keep pressure on for progress.
Looking ahead to the G20 in Paris, which begins this Friday, President Nicolas Sarkozy of France, the host country, has made reforming the international monetary system his key focus. What do you expect will be the big headline out of this G20 summit?
Well, so far, the French presidency's agenda for the international monetary system reform includes, first, the framework for strong, sustainable, and balanced growth that I mentioned. That's this collaborative approach to policy. Second, to look and see if there's a consensus around some guidelines to govern international capital flows that have been so important for policy setting, especially in emerging market countries.
More established economies have struggled in the past 3 years. That money has flowed into other emerging economies, overheating some of them. There's big concern about that.
Even though global growth on average has been quite good, in the advanced economies, as we know, it's been too slow to make a big dent in the high unemployment, while in the emerging economies, it's been very fast, and we're seeing incipient signs of overheating. That's why we need rebalancing. Of course, we all know that over time, the emerging markets need to catch up to the advanced economies in income, and that's going to produce faster growth, and that's going to produce capital flows to those countries for years to come. What we have to make sure is that those capital flows are productive for everybody and not destabilizing.
Do you expect any real substantial progress on that front, the issue of reform on a global scale at this G20 summit, realistically?
Well, this is the ministerial meeting, and this process is really pointed towards November's G20 Leaders Summit in Cannes. By that time, there should be some real advances, even though these are complex issues.
The managing director of the IMF, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, warned, interestingly enough, recently that even though we have this economic recovery, not only here in the U.S., but across developed nations, that it's also beset by tensions. And he said those tensions could sow the seeds of the next crisis. What are your concerns heading into this meeting?
Well, first and foremost, we know there needs to be a rebalancing of global growth. Those countries running very large surpluses need to shift the sources of their growth towards domestic demand. Those countries running large deficits need to do the opposite. If we can do these all together, they'll be mutually supportive. Secondly, there's still lingering risks, of course, in the European financial and economic system that need to continue to be addressed. Third, we have to make sure that we don't get overheating in the emerging market countries that could lead to new instability. And over time, the advanced economies, including the United States, need to make credible progress towards medium-term fiscal adjustment, because we all know that the advanced economies can't continue to run the size of deficits and debt that they have accumulated in the last few years.